Dear students, today we are going to do a course on which is the massive open online course on Indian Economy 1. The unit is Economic Development since Independence. The module that we are going to discuss is Module 7, Planning and Industrial Policy Script. Now, to do this, we need to see what are the learning objectives. After the completion of the module, you are able to understand the building blocks of the industrialization process in India and how India evolved into a modern industrial economy. That's the second learning objective. And the third learning objective is how industrialization and development in India have gone hand in hand. The plan of discussion: first we will introduce you to the planning process, and then which will give you a background. Then we will talk about different industrial policy resolutions since 1948, the IPR 1948. Then within the planning process, we will talk about the first phase of industrial policy making in India. Then we will discuss the second phase of industrial policy making in India, and then the third phase of industrial policy making in India. Finally, before we conclude, we will talk about the Make in India program. Now, to introduce what do we mean by the planning process in India, why India went in for planning. You would know that on the eve of the independence, India was a resource-constrained economy, resource in the sense of financial resources, though she had plenty of natural resources and human resources, but financial resources were less. The domestic financial resources in terms of savings were constrained in the economy. On the other hand, external resources in terms of foreign exchange reserves, India was constrained in that sense also. So these two constraints, resource constraints, operated in India, and that's why to take the economy, post-independent economy, to a balanced, higher growth level, these resources have to be distributed equally across sectors. That's why the forefathers or the fathers of the planning process, they thought that planning is necessary. Now, in India, what has happened? The planning process, there was a break after 1947, the year of independence. There was a break for 3 years, and the planning process in India started in 1950-51. The 50-51 to 55-56 was the first 5-year plan, when it was thought that a post-independence, which is the post-independence period, immediately after independence, there will be balancing of growth. What in economic parlance we call it, the objective was towards a balanced economic growth in the Indian economy. The planning process, since the first 5-year plan, and in particular the first 5-year plan, tried to balance of growth between the agricultural sector and the industrial sector. Why it was thought so? Because during independence or just before independence, many global economic events and economic events within the country actually devastated the economy, and there was a necessity for stabilizing the economy. There was a necessity towards stabilizing growth both in the agricultural sector as well as in the non-agricultural, in particular the industrial sector. With this thing, the planning process started, and as we went on, during the first 5-year plan, which had a very moderate objective in terms of balancing growth between agriculture and industry, accordingly resources were distributed between the two sectors, whatever financial resources were there, because just on the eve of the independence, India was primarily an agrarian economy and the industrial sector was not so developed. Now, what has happened? So, because of being an agrarian economy, the level of income was low. With the level of income being low, there was low level of savings. As there was low level of savings, there was low level of investment. And as investment was low, the growth level in the economy was also low. So there was a vicious cycle that was operating within India. Now, the objective was to maintain a level of growth which was not particularly a low level of growth, but improve the level of growth and balance it between the two sectors, because agricultural sector was predominant, the industrial sector was not that predominant, and to balance of growth between the two sectors. Now, the other problem inherited from the past on the eve of independence is high rate of inflation, and the inflation rate had to be moderated. So with these twin objectives, actually the first 5-year plan process started. Then there were 12 5-year plans with breaks in as annual plans intermittently, but there were 12 5-year plans till the 12th 5-year plan in the end of 1990s or early 2000s. But after that, the planning process had been dismantled. Now, this, when you look at planning, over the plans, since the second 5-year plan, actually the process of industrialization started. In the first 5-year plan, it was balancing of growth between the industrial sector and the agricultural sector, but the planning process actually took industrialization as an important objective from the second 5-year plan process. Now, while doing so, there are two things that need to be kept in mind, that because of resource constraint, the investment was thought to be coming from within the economy, and what happened in the second 5-year plan was actually we had borrowed the model of the second 5-year plan following the Russian model of development, the Feldman model of development, and this model of development in India later on came to be known as the Mahalanobis model, after the erudite development planner, statistician, physicist, P.C. Mahalanobis. Now, P.C. Mahalanobis, on the advice of Prime Minister Nehru, actually drew up the second 5-year plan. Now, what was the basis of the second 5-year plan? The second 5-year plan also thought of that India should leap into higher rates of growth, and the growth will necessarily come from the industrial sector. Now, 3 questions were addressed in the second 5-year plan. The first question that was being addressed was actually what to produce. Second question was how to produce, and third question that was addressed by whom to produce. And here, actually, all the 3 questions were addressed. In the second 5-year plan, the main focus was industrialization through the development of the capital goods sector. And it was thought that 1/3 of total investment in the economy would go to the capital goods sector and rest would go to the rest of the economy. And this, along with this, who will make this investment and where will this investment come from? It was decided that investment will primarily come from the public sector, and there will be large-scale industrialization through industrialization of capital goods. Now, to do this, there was an industrial policy framework that was laid in India immediately after independence, and one such thing was one such industrial policy resolution which laid the basis of industrialization in India was the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1948. What did the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1948 think of? It thought of that India has to be a mixed economy. There will be coexistence of small-scale industries and cottage industries along with large-scale industries. It restricted foreign investment into the economy, so investment will primarily come from within the domestic economy, and industries were categorized into 4 sectors. The 4 sectors, most of them, the top 3, the first 3 would be primarily in the within the government sector, either public sector undertakings or central government monopolies, and then there will be industries regulated by the government, and there would be a smaller private sector which consists of private sector enterprises, individuals, and cooperatives. Following that, when the second 5-year plan came in, the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956 was brought in. It talked about industrialization, and it talked about the public sector undertaking, which often Nehru told that the public sector undertakings will be the temples of modern India. They will drive the economy. Now, along with industrialization process, it will definitely lead to higher industrial growth, but the second thing that was not so explicit, but also that the growth will trickle down, and that will take care of unemployment, poverty, and inequality, but to a lesser extent. Now, this policy framework, industrial policy framework, which was laid down in 1948 and redone in 1956, that was carried on for the next 21 years till 1977. And what was done in 1977, I will come to it in a minute, but the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956 governed the planning process directed the planning process from 1955-56 to the third plan in 1960-61 to the fourth plan in 1969-73. Now, there was a planning holiday or a phase of annual plans from 66 to 69. Now, what happened during this period? Industrial policy resolutions were there, and that guided the planning process. Now, industrialization started happening in the economy with the growth of large-scale industries in India. With the emphasis that was laid on large-scale industrialization, with the growth of large-scale industries or large-scale public sector enterprises, that spearheaded growth in the Indian economy. And as a result, industrial growth as well as overall growth was unprecedented from the mid-50s towards the mid-60s. Suddenly, from the mid-60s, because of a plethora of reasons, the industrial economy started slowing down. One thing that was brought to the notice, or it was analyzed, that public investment had actually started slowing down, and as a result, the industrial sector started slowing down. So you would see the process of planning which started, or industrial planning which started in the mid-50s, that uh, actually slowed down from the mid-60s onwards. Now, what was this process from the mid-50s onwards? It was a process of import substitution. What is import substitution? Import substitution, to say it in a layman's language, import substitution would mean producing what we would have otherwise imported from the rest of the world. Import of industrial goods, import of manufacturing goods, which we would have otherwise imported from the rest of the world, we started producing it within the economy with the industrialization process. And which goods we thought of? It was the capital goods or the machinery and the equipment sector, along with steel and other things. Now, this laid with unprecedented industrial growth, as we said, from mid-50s to mid-60s, a large, widespread industrial sector was laid in the economy. But the industrial sector started slowing down from the mid-60s, and as a result, what happened? There was public sector investment or public investment in industries that was thought to be the main driver of industrial growth that actually slowed down. I'm just repeating that. And that was given prime importance. The other thing that happened within the industrial sector, we would see that concentration of economic power within the industrial sector that had taken place. Actually, with the import substitution process, what came in is actually protection of industries, because if you have to substitute imports, then you have to, the natural policy that was implemented was protection of domestic industries, and these industries were protected through industrial policy licensing or quantitative restriction, industrial policy licensing or quantitative restriction, and that was the main instrument of protection. Now, what are this policy? This policy would actually set the capacity limit of production of any goods or commodities or any industrial product that is there in the economy. Now, once that is being set, then who will produce? Once the capacity limit is set, it is the public sector that will produce, and maybe after the public sector produces, if still there is a capacity that is being left, then the private sector will come and produce. As a result, what happened? Very few private sector enterprises came up during that period. Now, which private sector enterprises were given licenses? Only those private sector enterprises which have credibility in industrial production, they were given licenses. So what happened? The industrial licensing process actually perpetuated that industrialists who had got licenses before and has credibility in industrial production, they only were given further licenses, and as a result, economic power through industrialization got concentrated in the hands of few industrial houses. And as a result, if you look at the monopoly structure or the structure of Indian manufacturing or Indian industry, there were concentration, large-scale concentration within the industry. Either it's a natural monopoly or it's a monopoly predominated by the public sector, or if there are private sector enterprises, there are very few private sector enterprises which were operating. Now, this was the other downside outcome of the industrialization process. Despite that, there was a large, wide industrial base that had come up. And the process of slowdown, which started from the mid-60s, it continued till the mid-70s or even thereafter. In 1977, when the new government came to power, they thought the focus of the industrial policy resolution need to be changed from large-scale industries towards the small-scale industries. And it was, though the existence of small-scale industries was recognized way back in IPR 1948, and it was reiterated in 1956, but the focus since 1956 was on large-scale industries. So small-scale industries were given more focus since 1977. More to it, in the industrial policy resolution since 1977, what happened? Again from 77 there was a planning holiday. What came to forth is actually restriction of foreign investment into the economy. Now in 1980, the next industrial policy resolution came, and the sixth five-year plan actually came in during that period. What happened? In the industrial policy resolution that came in, it was focused that there need to be restructuring of industries, there has to be liberalization with respect to industries, industrial licensing has to go away, and as a result from 1980 onwards the process of liberalization of Indian industries started with delicensing and removal of capacity limits. Now the planning process also started doing that, and the issue of mixed economy was more open, so import substitution coexisted with outward orientation. I will not say it's outward orientation then, but it was opening up of the economy, first in terms of delicensing of the industrial sector, followed by delicensing of the trade sector from the mid-80s onwards. Now, this process from 77 to 80, the life of the industrial policy resolution was short-lived. It was revamped and in 1980, and the focus of the industrial policy actually started, that was laid down in 1948 or 56, that started changing from 1980 onwards. And further changes were brought in the industrial policy resolution of 1991, when the entire industrial sector was undergoing through a process of reforms. What started as liberalization in 1980, it culminated into a comprehensive reforms package. In 1980, we allowed, with removal of capacity limits, we allowed the private sector to come and operate, but in 1991, the foreign investors were also allowed to come and operate, along with other reforms like removal of quantitative restrictions, lowering or reduction in the tariff rates, and that's how the economy has transformed itself into a more open economy. And this policy, industrial policy resolution of 1991, has continued thereafter till 2014, I would say, when the Make in India initiative was ushered into the Indian economy. And what it actually tried to do, it had tried to not only look at the industrial sector, but it had also brought in the Make in India initiative, the major thing that was brought in, that it was the services sector which was also brought in. Because post-1980 or post-1991, we would see a large growth in the services sector, and the service sector has emerged important in the economy. So when the Make in India initiative was brought in, the services were brought in along with the industrial sector. Now, I have talked about all this. Now, the reforms were also in three phases. First, in the 1980s, it was industrial sector reforms and trade liberalization in 1985. Then you have the 1990s, when you have more comprehensive reforms, and you allow FDI, the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act of 1970s, they were replaced by Foreign Exchange Management Act in 1999, and 100% foreign equity participation in Indian manufacturing was allowed. After 2000 and thereafter, the reforms were mostly associated with unfinished agenda, and that culminated into the Make in India program of 2014. Now, one major industrial policy reform that happened in 2005-2006 was the SEZs were given particular importance through an SEZ Act of 2005. Now, if you look at the tariff rates, as we have open economy, one indicator of openness would be the tariff rate. And if you look at the tariff rates from 1990 onwards to 2010, you would see across sectors there has been a reduction in the tariff rates, whether it's agriculture, whether it's industry, whether it's any kind of industry or ores and minerals. Why this has been so? Because it had the reforms process had the objective of lowering not only the average rate of tariff but also the peak rates of tariff, and as a result we would see the average rate of tariff has come down from 1990 through 2010. However, in 2016 we see a reversal of these tariff rates, and in many of the industrial sector where the tariff rate had gone below 10% in 2010, they were being reversed. And there is an increase in the tariff rate, for instance, in machinery and transport equipment, with regards to leather and leather manufacturers, with regards to chemicals. Many sectors did undergo a reversal in the tariff rate. So it is often said that since 2014 or after 2010, what has happened, there has been a reversal in the process of reforms, and increasingly, even during Make in India, many industries are given protection so that the industrial sector revives and Indian industries become competitive in the world market. So to conclude, industrial policy and planning, as we saw, went hand in hand. There was an overarching objective of industrialization in the planning process, and this actually did not go away. Many new additional objectives like reduction in unemployment, poverty and inequality had come in. Development of infrastructure had come in the 2000s, but industrialization was the overarching objective to start with, and it continued thereon. Changes were brought in the industrial policy resolution as well as in the planning process to accommodate domestic economic developments and developments that happened in the rest of the world. Nonetheless, this process laid the foundation of a wide industrial base. Thank you.